Now that it's the active growing season, we'll hopefully be seeing lots of new growth on our plants, some of which might need support. So I'm going to show you how to make 3 different plant support poles that are really quick and easy to make and will hopefully also save you money, particularly if you've got lots of plants in your houseplant collection that need support. Now this is a remake of one of my first videos that I did, which was made on a smartphone, so the quality wasn't great and also it was far too long, so I'm going to crack on and show you exactly how to make these plant support poles. Now it's really easy to get started and doesn't require many materials at all, particularly if you're only using one of these methods. So you might have some of these already in your home, or they are readily available through craft shops, garden centres, homeware stores and even online. So first of all, we need whatever base of the plant support pole we're going to use, so some sort of wooden dowling, thin tree stakes, canes, or even these thin planks of rectangular wood work just as well. Then the materials that you'll be using to cover them. So I've got 3 different materials for the 3 different methods. So we've got some jute rope, some hessian fabric, and the traditional coconut core. So when you buy them from the shop, they are often made of the coconut core. So I've only got the lining there, as we'll obviously be making our own. Then something to tie them down with, so some natural twine just to fit in with the aesthetic. And this is again readily available. You might already have this if you use it for your houseplants or gardening. And some sharp scissors, so you do need sharp scissors to cut through some of those materials, so they will help with that. And then lastly, this is optional, but it is beneficial to have an adhesive just to give you a helping hand at the start. So I like to use a hot glue gun because it's strong glue and it dries really fast, and that just gives a helping hand, as I said, when sticking it to the wood to begin with, before you then tie everything down with the thread. But any adhesive that is fast drying will work just as well, or if you're good with the thread and you tie it down really tightly to begin with, then you might not need it. So the first one we'll do is the one with the jute rope, and this is perhaps the easiest and the fastest one to do. This does benefit from having an adhesive, particularly at the end, if you do want to cover the end of the pole, where you can stick the end of the rope down and just cover that up. However, again, it's not strictly necessary, and all we're going to do to get started is, as you might already sort of have guessed, is just tie the rope onto a piece of the pole near the end, but leave a bit at the bottom, because obviously it's going to go in the soil as well, so you need to leave a little bit of room at the bottom of the pole that's going to be staked in the soil. And all I'm going to do is just double knot that just to make sure that it's on there tightly at the end. If I was using the adhesive here, what I could also do, just to make sure that that is stuck down, is use some adhesive just at the base and then use a little bit of adhesive along it, and then keep topping that up as I go, as I wrap the rope around it, so that I know that that rope is going to be stuck in place and it's not necessarily going to slide up and down the pole like this. So that's where the adhesive can come in really handy with this method. But again, if you tie it or wrap it really tightly and twist as you go too, just to give some tension so that it holds on to itself as it's going around the pole, that will help it to stay in place. So this is a bit of a repetitive motion, but again, really easy and quick to do. So you could possibly do this while you're watching TV or something like that. And you're just gonna wrap the rope around the pole. It's easier to turn the pole to wrap the rope round rather than trying to wrap the rope round each time, unless you want a bit of extra exercise. And then as you go along, just make sure that you're bunching it down to make sure that it's really tightly packed down the pole. And again, that'll help just to hold itself in place on the pole. And if you need to at any point, again, just reapply adhesive and keep going until you get to the end. And it's as simple as that. And I'll show you what I'll do when you get to the end as well, if you do have the adhesive. So we've gone from wrapping the rope around the pole, and here's one that I made earlier. So I've got this one that I made previously, so we've still got the bit that goes in the soil, and then all of this is secured onto the pole, the rope wrapped around it, which will provide a really nice support for whatever plants are growing up this for the roots or little stickers to get into and help it travel up the support pole. And then what you'll see at the end, rather than having the blank piece of wood or the offcut area of the wood, what I've done is just used a bit of adhesive to stick the end of the rope down so it's completely covered with the rope, and it just gives it a little bit of a neater finish. So that one, really quick and easy to do. So let's move on to the second pole. So the next pole we're going to do is with the hessian fabric, slightly different method but just as easy to do. So I'll show you how to do that, and this is where the adhesive can come in handy too, just to give you a little bit of a helping hand when you start to stick the end of the fabric down on the pole before we wrap it around. So all I've done to get started is cut a piece of the hessian fabric large enough to cover the length of the pole that I've got, and it's wide enough so that I can actually wrap it around a few times to get a good thick pole that will be decent for the plant to latch onto and obviously provide support as the plant grows. So I'm going to move my camera now, and then I can show you exactly how to put this on the pole. So to assemble the hessian support pole, all I've done is put the piece of fabric that I've cut down on the table, and I've lined the edge up with the edge of the fabric. Don't worry too much about any loose threads that might be going on. Depending on the weave of the fabric, some of them could come loose. We can trim those off at the end. Just trim any major ones off. Now this one can be quite fiddly in terms of coming off the pole, so this is where the adhesive can come in really useful. So all I'm going to do with this is just run some adhesive down the edge of the fabric and stick the pole down to begin with, and then that'll just help that, as I said, affix to the pole. And then once you've got that first bit on the piece of wood, it's then much easier to roll up thereafter. So then once you've got that first bit of the pole wrapped, it's really easy. You're just going to go along and roll it, but roll it slowly just to make sure that you're not getting any bunching or sort of loosening bits on the length of the pole. And if you do notice it's starting to bunch up, just straighten out the fabric. And if you need to, if you get any sort of bunching on the pole, just pull the fabric where the bunching is just to pull it tighter again, because we want a nice tight wrap on the pole so that it doesn't come loose. Do also check at the end just to make sure that you are rolling it in an even fashion and it's not then starting to come off at an angle, which can be the case. I've not got a straight edge on this bit, so obviously I've got a bit wonky with my scissors, but I'll just trim that down. There is a nice straight edge, I can see there actually where the crease is, so what I'll probably do is get to there and I'll just trim that off just to make sure that's a straight edge. So that's all wrapped up now, and I'm just going to use some pieces of the twine just to hold it in place, only roughly to begin with, as we're going to make it look a lot neater with the final piece of twine that we put down it. But these are just going to make sure it stays rolled up. If you do take your hands off it, it does have a habit of trying to get away, so just keep hold of it before you actually get these tied down. So I'm going to put about 5 down the length of the pole. And you don't need to worry about how neat these are either, because we're going to remove these once the final piece of twine is on. If any of it does happen to unravel, like that little bit that has just there, just pull it tight again so it's even with the rest of it and tie it in place. So that's it, that's all the holding pieces in place now, so I can take my hands off it, and that just makes it easier to wrap the last bit of thread around it and finish it off. Don't worry about how untidy it looks at the moment, it will look a lot neater when we are finished. So I've just got a long piece of thread here, I folded it over and it's still a very long piece of thread, and I'm just going to put this at the end. I'll start at the end of the pole and make a lark's head knot, which is just where you make the loop around the end of the pole and then tuck the rest of the thread through the loop, and that just gives you the ability to leverage that against itself and pull that really tightly on there, and then just loop that around so that you can actually tie a knot to secure that in place. As this is going to be the final piece of thread that we go down the pole with, just make sure this is as tight as possible. So then, a little bit like what we did with the rope going around the pole, but this time we're going to wrap this around the pole at sort of intervals of maybe about 1 inch or a few centimeters to secure this down the length of the pole. Just pull it really tightly. You can see how tight I'm pulling that as I go down the pole, and just go in the direction that the fabric is wrapped around it as well, so you're not going against this loose edge and it's actually going to hold it down as you go around. If you do have a particularly rough edge on your fabric, then just make the turns, or the distance between the turns, a little bit smaller so you're getting more turns around the pole with the thread, and that'll just help to hold it down better and make it look a lot neater. And then just keep going until you get to the end. So that is now at the end of the fabric, and I've just got enough left to tie it off, I think, so that's worked out really well. That was a stroke of luck there, and you saw how quick that was to get that done all the way down the length of the pole. This is only a small one, maybe about 1 meter. So now I'm just going to tie this off. So all I'll do is tuck some of this underneath one of the bits that I've just wrapped around, and then do a standard double knot with those 2 loose ends. So that's it now with the final piece of thread all the way down it, holding it in place, so we can remove these loose tacking bits that we had to hold it down to begin with. So all I'm going to do is find where they are and then remove those. If I can remove and then cut them off, probably that'll be quicker. But just make sure that when you do this, you are cutting off the tacking pieces, not the pieces of thread that you've obviously just wrapped around, otherwise it'll all unwind. So this is the final pole, and I've just gone down and tidied it up. So I've removed the tacking threads that we had on it to hold it down to begin with, and trimmed off the loose threads that were on the rough edges. So the rough edge is now securely down and looks a lot tidier than it did to begin with, and I've given this bit at the end as well a trim because that was a rough edge of fabric, although I do need to just trim off those last little bits. So I'll tidy that up, but saying that, this will all be hidden once it's in a plant. Once a plant is growing up it, you won't actually see the pole, but hopefully a plant will be very happy growing up this support pole. And now we'll move on to the traditional coconut core one. So this one uses a similar method to the hessian plant support pole, but it is a little bit trickier as this fabric or material is quite a bit thicker. It's also quite coarse as well, so if you do notice it irritates your skin, you might want to wear gloves if they are sensitive to this. So all I'm going to do, just like I did with the hessian, and this looks like it's going to be almost the right size from a previous pole that I did as well, is just cut a length of fabric long enough to cover the length of pole that I want, and just like with the hessian fabric as well, I want it to be wide enough so that I can wrap it round a couple of times just to give a chunky or thicker pole for the plants to hold on to. So when it comes to wrapping the coconut core pole, as I said, it can be quite fiddly, so I like to start with having some pieces of thread down on the table, and they will just act almost as tacking to hold the coconut core in place initially before I start to wrap it with the rest of the twine to secure it in place, and then these tacking bits of thread can be removed afterwards just so that it looks a little bit neater. So I've put those all out on the desk roughly where I want them, and then I'm just going to put the coconut core piece of fabric down. So hopefully you can see most of it on the camera. I've got the top end here where my hand is, and then all I'm going to do is, or the bottom end should I say, put the pole on the coconut core, and at the very far edge make sure that the pole is lined up with the end of the coconut core. You might want to leave a little bit over the edge if you want to cover up the raw edge, or you can leave it at the top to make it flush with the top of the pole, and then just start to wrap it round, and you might notice that the threads will also start to stick to the coconut core. So this can take a little bit of back and forth just to get the coconut core to be malleable, at least in the first few attempts, because you'll often find that it starts to ping back. So if you can get the first bit in and stuck on itself on one end, and then the rest of it should be a little bit easier to actually get in and wrap around, and we can always straighten it up. So that's the first bit initially under, and all I'm going to do is just roll it up before I then tie those tacks down. You have to be really firm with this because it does try and ping away from the pole and unravel, and you can see this is building up a really nice thick plant support pole, and just secure that in place before we then wrap the main piece of twine around it to hold it in place and actually look a lot nicer than just these 5 tacking bits that I'm putting on here. Just try and make them as tight as possible. If you do notice any pieces starting to unravel, particularly at the ends before you get to tacking them down, just pull at the cut edge of the fabric and tuck it back round so it's tight against the pole again, and then you can put the tacking on. So now to secure this and make it look a lot neater, I've got a much longer piece of twine, and that'll be the final bit that goes all the way down the length of the pole. You'll be surprised at how much you actually need, so cut a very long length, or if you do happen to run out part way through, you can just tie it off and then carry on from where you left off. So I've got a very long piece, and all I've done is folded it over so that I can get started with a lark's head knot, and all that means is putting it round, folded over with the hoop, and then putting the rest of the thread through the hoop, and that helps to pull that really tightly because you can anchor it against itself and pull it back and forth until you've got a really tight knot on there, and then you can secure that again just with a standard double knot, just maybe round the other side. So now that's tied tightly on the end, all I'm going to do is start to wrap it round and pull it really tightly. You can see how tight that's being pulled in the direction of the way the fabric was rolled, so that I can tie down those loose edges that we had that were sticking up after we'd put the tacking on, and that's just going to make that look a lot neater as we go down the pole. And also don't worry about the tacking threads that we put on earlier, because we'll cut those off and remove those, so you don't need to worry about those getting tangled up. And again, I'm not worried that this is twisting around a little bit as I'm going, it's just because I'm pulling it really tightly. I can always just straighten this up once I'm finished and make sure that it's all in line. So I'm going to carry on with this and finish this off, and then I'll show you the end result. So now that I've come to the end, all I'm going to do is tuck one of these pieces underneath the bit that I've just wrapped around, and then I'm going to do a double knot, wrap this round and do a double knot just to make sure that it's tied and secure. Just to make this a little bit at the very end, as I started here, a little bit tidier, I'm just going to put an extra knot or an extra line of the thread around that, just so that it holds it down and it also hopefully looks a little bit neater. And that already makes a big difference there. You can see how neater that looks. So this is the pole so far, and you can see it's a little bit uneven, but I did say we could still tidy it up. So as I've gone round, I've obviously shifted the coconut core, so all I'm going to do is just shift that back so it's all in line, or at least so where the seam was is in line and it looks a bit neater rather than being twisted around the pole. And I'm going to go down, and part of that tidying up, as I said, we can remove the tacking pieces that are currently all tied under the main thread that we put through. When we remove these, just make sure you are removing the tacking pieces and not the twisted thread that you've put all the way around. So I can see this is one of the tacking pieces, and then that should just slide straight out there really easily, and it makes it look a lot neater. And there's another one, so I can take that one off, and then I'll just take off the other three from lower down. So there is the completed coconut core pole, and you can see that I've wrapped that all the way down. And what I should have said is, when you're tying knots on it, try and make sure the knots are on the back along the seam of the coconut core, so any bits that are maybe a little bit untidier than the rest of it are then hidden on the back, so you can put it in the plant or this way facing out where you've got the nice twisted pattern that you've made with the thread. However, even saying that, once it's in the plant and the plant starts to grow, all of this is going to be covered by all of that foliage anyway, so you don't need to worry too much about it being the neatest thing, so long as you are happy with the end results. So here we have the 3 support poles with the different materials, so you can make whichever one you prefer. The main benefit of making your own are, of course, the size, so you can make it to whatever size that the plant you have needs. So when you go into the shop to buy them, you're restricted by whatever sizes they have. And again, even if they do sell them, it's dependent on the availability too. Do they actually have the size that you need? So at least with this, you can make it to exactly the size that the plant needs, maybe even a little bit bigger to give them a bit of growing room, so you don't need to extend it or swap them out quite soon after putting one in. So they can also be cheaper to make as well. When you're buying the fabric, the materials yourself, making them yourself, they can be cheaper than what you would buy in the shops. And of course, different retailers will vary in price as well. So although it is still cheaper overall to make our own with the round doweling, it's even cheaper to use a square or rectangular piece of wood, where you can find these, just the thin ones, that will replicate obviously that round doweling that you've used. Once it's wrapped up in rope or hessian or coconut core, it's going to make no difference to the plant what its support pole is in terms of shape. So you can use these, and these are significantly cheaper, maybe 3 to 4 times less than round doweling. So hopefully you would find the same, depending on where you are and where your hardware stores are, you'd find the same sort of price difference. If you've got a lot of houseplants that need support, then that can save you quite a bit of money. And then the last thing is, of course, it's just nice to get your get hands on and create your own things, do a DIY plant project, and you've got the satisfaction of knowing that you've made them yourself. I do have a previous video on making an actual moss pole using sphagnum moss, but it is an older video, so I'll probably remake that at some point in the near future. If you have found this useful in learning how to make plant support poles, then consider subscribing. I'll have new videos every week, usually on a Sunday, and usually on plant related topics. If you are going to make any of these yourself, which one are you going to make? Or if you've got any tips for making your own plant support poles, share them in the comments below. I'd love to see them, and you'd also be helping out other viewers too. As always, thank you for watching. Grow your well-being.